Hi, and welcome to another episode of Hot Takes with me, the Silver Fox. And I've got to say that this is probably the big one. This is the big story that I've been promising, but I think this is probably the biggest thing in terms of stories that I've ever been involved in. I've been working with Lesley Roberts for 18 months, 16 to 18 months now. Over that time, we've had Lesley on. We've done several Zooms with Lesley. We've talked about the events of what was happening through COVID. We've talked about her attempting to bring the Scottish Government and particularly Nicola Sturgeon and Jean Freeman to book. We've talked about procedures. We've talked about failings. We've done a lot. Over this time, Lesley has worked tirelessly and at great personal cost to bring all this to the front. She was denied access to the Scottish COVID inquiry and had the chance to go in front of the UK COVID inquiry. This is no longer happening. Why this is no longer happening is in itself a story worth the telling, and we will put this in with this tale. Now, I'm going to change the format. Normally, you know, regular viewers know my format. We'll be changing the format of this video just for this one-off special. And what we're going to do is we're going to put it into chapters. We're going to take you through on a story. We're going to put a bit of background in. Then we're going to do the original COVID inquiry, Scotland's COVID inquiry. Then we're going to come up to date. And when we finish, you'll be astounded at the lengths that the establishment have gone to ensure that Lesley Roberts is not permitted to give her evidence. The reason being, and we'll see this in time, is that her evidence is so explosive, it would not only, as we've previously thought, utterly destroy the SNP government, probably result in criminal charges if it was included and was taken as real within the confines of an inquiry, but would blow out of the water any confidence the people of Scotland had in any form of devolved government. It's that important and that big. The lies that were told, the crimes that were committed. However, as it's turning out, it is so big and the lies are so huge that it would not only take out the Scottish government, it would do great damage to the UK government. And I believe now that even the UK establishment is working in tandem in order to push back and to destroy credibility, to destroy any chance of what Lesley has to say to come out into the public knowledge. I am going to take you through this now. We're going to go through a brief history and then through various chapters leading up until effectively today. So, slight change of format. Now, I'm going to apologise for regular viewers who know some of the story and history. I am going to put a brief history in as the first chapter, simply because any new viewers coming in, or anyone not sort of au fait with the way Scottish politics works, needs to just be aware of the background. So we're going to do a background, then the history, and then the modern. You know, this sort of last 10 days, really. The last 10 days themselves have been fairly explosive. So we're going to go through this in chapters, and we're going to just basically walk you through it. And at the end of it, you must make your own mind up as to how the people of Scotland go forward. I know personally, I think it should be pitchforks and burning torches, and there should be some kind of constitutional change in Scotland over this. Thank you very much. Let's go in and let's run with this. Here goes. When the coronavirus hit, many countries saw it as a threat to public safety, and some saw it as an opportunity. Boris's big mistake was, of course, to allow the regions to control their own destiny, if you will, on this matter, rather than running the whole of the defence out of Cobra down in London as a national policy. He bent the knee and was weak and he gave the likes of Nicola Sturgeon the right to control her own response. They had protocols, they would discuss, they would say this would happen. Then she would run out of the meetings and be the first to get on TV, because it was important that she was seen to be leading. She was seen to be the one that was in charge. Scotland's mammy. You'll do as I say. It was all me, and ego. She could have listened to the scientists. She could have listened to experts in the field. Experts like this. This, ladies and gentlemen, is Hugh Pennington. He is a leading professor of virology and epidemiology. This man is actually responsible for helping to find the coronavirus in the very first place. He was available. He was on her medical team. And instead, she ignored him. So why did she ignore him? Well, of course, he's an expert. It means that when he speaks, you're supposed to listen and you're supposed to do what he says. And that would not have suited the political ends of Nicola Sturgeon one little bit. So she got this guy, Leash. Leash, of course, is not an epidemiologist. He's not a virologist. Leash is not even a proper doctor. He's a dentist who failed his dental exams 7 times before he finally managed to scrape over the line and become a doctor of dentistry. And so it was obvious that he must be put in charge of this crisis. And why? Well, I think the answer is obvious. He would be easy to control. He would do as he was told, and it allowed Nicola Sturgeon and her cabal to push people into total control. Lockdown. Do as I say. Look at me. I am the dictator of Scotland. She imposed masks. Masks which many people said were not suitable. One of the people who said they were not suitable, of course, is this lady, Lesley Roberts. Lesley, of course, will know what she's talking about, for not only is she, as you see, a nurse, but she was in charge of infection control at the hospital. She was also a health and safety rep and a union rep. Lesley was involved with this. She knew these weren't PPE masks. Indeed, it actually says on the box they come in, no PPE masks, unsuitable for coronavirus. It actually said them. And yet they were forced, and the whole population of Scotland were forced to wear these masks. It's subsequently come out after a study with the University of East Anglia that the masks actually made things worse. If this can be proven in a court of law, then despite any defence they're going to try and have, there is no defence. They will have known that these masks weren't PPE and weren't a defence, and if it's shown that they were actually worse and yet imposed, then the people imposing them, Nicola, Jean Freeman, the whole bunch, will all be liable under health and safety laws. This, after all, is supposed to be a health and safety equipment, and therefore unlimited fines, unlimited jail terms. It's possible. That's a separate line of inquiry. The worst thing, of course, is she imposed them on people. She imposed them on school children, even though experts all over the place said it was not suitable for children. Children had very little chance and risk of getting them. And it bounced Boris into forcing them across the whole of England as well, and then Wales and Northern Ireland followed suit. Soon everybody was doing it in the mistaken belief that these things actually helped. And as I say, it's subsequently shown that they haven't. But of course, none of this was done for the betterment of the people. It was all done for political ends. And that is why you ended up in a situation where politics superseded common sense and science, and that people were forced into doing stupid things, pointless things, and sometimes even dangerous things. And this is where we get to the point where it affected Lesley directly. Lesley's mother is called Letitia. Letitia was taken ill, was taken into hospital, and received what can only be described as very, very poor levels of care. She had falls, fell from beds, broken hip, all sorts of terrible things happening. And on her file, unbeknownst to Letitia, unbeknownst to Lesley, was a do not resuscitate, or DNA CPR as they call it, do not attempt CPR. Basically a do not resuscitate notice. This means if the patient falls particularly ill, then they're just to let the patient go. One can argue if it was end of life care, for example, that would be more humane. Lesley discovered that not only was this DNR in place, and that nobody had allowed it or authorised it, the patient, informed consent. The patient was not informed or asked for opinion, and Lesley was an act of eternity. She had power of attorney, and she hadn't been consulted either, neither as power of attorney nor as Letitia's daughter. This goes against all prevailing medical protocol. You don't just do this. To do this without informed consent could be considered either manslaughter or possible homicide. That's how serious this is. Lesley discovered that these DNR notices had been put not just on her mother, but on many, many people. Thousands, perhaps tens of thousands of people across Scotland, without their knowledge, without their informed consent, without the knowledge or consent of close family members, next of kin, that sort of thing. Not everyone who got these was particularly old. There are recorded cases of a woman who was indeed a fit woman, a marathon runner, who was 46 years of age and had a do not resuscitate notice put on her file, unbeknownst to her, only accidentally discovered. And indeed, Lesley only discovered the DNR through the accident of the hospital forgetting to hide it suitably well enough, allowing it to fall into a laundry bag. How many people had this? How many people were allowed to go, just disappear without any form of attempt to save them? We will probably never know. Lesley started making a fuss. She started asking questions, making a pain of herself. The hospital didn't like it. The hospital, in fact, didn't like it at all. Lesley's mother was moved, unbeknownst to Lesley, to a care home, an old people care home. Nobody told Lesley where Letitia had gone. Nobody had informed anyone where Letitia had gone. And indeed, it was purely an act of sheer coincidence that they found out. And that's because of another patient who happened to know somebody. I'm not going to go into details on this personal matter, but it was sheer coincidence and luck that Lesley found out where her mother was. She went to the home. The home wouldn't let her in, of course, because the rules were such. Letitia died in that home. That home also put a DNR on Letitia, and indeed on every single patient, without consent. Every care home, old people's home in Scotland did the same. And part of Operation Copa moving forward is that the police are investigating every single care home. And it appears, and I can't speak for sure because obviously it's an ongoing investigation, but it appears possibly that the instructions from the care homes were not just something they randomly come up with themselves, but were passed down from government, passed down from Jean Freeman. Jean Freeman also helped to create and published the treatment book for COVID. Now, Dr. John Campbell has gone over this in his excellent videos, and if you haven't seen them, I advise you go and watch Dr. John Campbell. He doesn't give opinion, he gives scientific fact. He explains what things are, how they work, what they do. Very clinical, very informative, and very frightening. And he said that, and proved it, that what they had in the original treatment for COVID was a mixture of things like midazolam, and Oromorph. These are end-of-life palliative care treatments. These are what you give to send someone to eternal rest. Hearken them unto God, if you believe in such things. Midazolam brings everything down, the Oromorph sends you to sleep, and then away you go. And it's supposed to be quiet, peaceful, easy to go. And that's fine for someone in, say, late stage cancer. Doesn't want to suffer. It's a humane way. This was put in the treatment book for COVID. And you have Jean Freeman, her department, doing this. When she was caught, that treatment book changed. They pulled it from every hospital and they replaced it with one that did not have that as a treatment. However, it existed on their website. And when they scrub their website, they forget, because they are politicians and are therefore very stupid, that nothing on the internet has gone forever. And by using the Wayback Machine, this original version was found, scraped from the web and published and said, this is what the Scottish Government are doing. And one has to ask why the Scottish Government are doing it. And it's because older people tended to be more union-minded, and the powers that be, Sturgeon, Jean Freeman, her cabal, all of them, knew that they could use this opportunity of the COVID pandemic to eradicate opposition to nationalisation, to independence, by taking out a whole cohort of people, the elderly. And of course, Letitia, Lesley's mother, was one of these people and caught up. And Operation Cobra is looking at the deaths of around 4,500 or so elderly people just in care homes, and they're looking to see how many of these were done deliberately. It is a stink. Lesley discovered this. Lesley started raising the issue. Lesley was challenged. She was challenged professionally. She had threats to her career, to her standing. Lesley had to move house at this point. Lesley's car was firebombed. Lesley was threatened. Lesley was abused, both by people in the street, by organised nationalist attacks on her, by the health board. Lesley remained strong. She moved house. It subsequently, I found out that very recently she had one of her windows in her new house was shot at. Seriously. This is how bad it has been for Lesley. And throughout this time, she stood firm. She's fought on. She's pushed and pushed and pushed, and was hoping to be chosen and selected for the Scottish COVID inquiry. And we'll come to that in the next chapter. When Scottish COVID inquiry was announced, I think most people knew straight away from the very start that it would be nothing more than a cover-up. It would be an attempt to deflect, to hide the real truth. It would be a mask. Basically, let's put this on. Let's pretend we cared. Let's pretend that we did our very best. But we all know that that's not the case, and especially now that the lies have been discovered. The lies about the destruction of WhatsApps, which should never have been allowed. The very fact, of course, they were even using WhatsApp in the first place. They should have done everything via official communications, but that wouldn't have suited the purpose. They couldn't have anything lying around that would end up with them going to jail. I think it was obvious from the beginning that this is what was going to happen, and indeed this is what happened. Some people actually said that they didn't know what they were doing and that mistakes were made because, quite literally, they'd never encountered this kind of thing before, and they in some cases panicked, did what they thought was right that later subsequently turned out to be wrong. And in those cases, I think, yes, mistakes were made, but you can forgive genuine mistakes, people under pressure, maybe doing the wrong thing because they didn't know what the right thing was. It's unavoidable and it's unfortunate, but I think it is forgivable. What's not forgivable, though, is how officialdom and the politicians acted on this, because they knew full well what was happening. They refused to listen to experts. Indeed, actively failed to listen to experts. They often stopped experts from speaking. And so it would be, because Lesley had a lot of evidence. A lot of evidence. And they knew it. And when she applied to speak to the Scottish COVID inquiry, her application was initially denied. She had no standing, apparently. I mean, despite being a union rep, despite being a health and safety rep, and despite being an infection control nurse, apparently that wasn't good enough. She has no standing. Quite clearly, that was a lie. She indeed had a lot of standing. What they couldn't have is Lesley telling the truth. They had to make sure she did not appear on that inquiry. Somehow, because of other people going in, and basically a group that did have standing invited Lesley to come in, and that gave her vicarious standing. She was part of that group, and then she could give evidence. There is an unfortunate series of correspondences that occurred. This led to Lesley not remaining part of that group. Her evidence was too hard, basically, and the group felt that her evidence would totally undermine theirs by basically taking the focus away from them. I'm going to leave that there. I'm not going to go too much in detail on that. She lost the standing there, much, I think, to the relief of the Scottish COVID group. It became apparent through that hearing, which still hasn't quite finished yet, still ongoing, but they're waiting for other things, that there was a lot of chicanery going on. There was a lot of perceived criminality. I have to be careful with my words. Perceived criminality. Certainly things were never as they seemed, and nobody really believed what the government were stepping in. And so that's what happened. So Lesley was not really allowed to present her evidence at the Scottish COVID inquiry. She was shut down. But the evidence that was presented is more telling with what wasn't said. It's the gaps. It's the gaps that prove the case. It's often the way. It's between the lines. It's what's not there. It's the missing that tells the story. And so it was with the Scottish COVID inquiry. But Lesley was not downhearted. Indeed, far from it, because Lesley was working on many other things. Sure, she was working on this evidence-based gathering to throw at the Scottish COVID inquiry. At the same time, she was working with Louise Slorence with regards to her husband's death. She was working, fighting for other people, left, right and centre. She was doing so many things in so many different areas. But she still pushed. She knew she couldn't let this go. Tenacious, like a little bulldog, gritted, teeth firmly clamped, not giving up. And so she decided that whilst she would probably not be allowed to give evidence at the Scottish inquiry, and indeed was, shall we say, dissuaded from doing so by Nats, many of whom said that her evidence could bring down the nationalist government and would set back independence. And that is how bad it would be. That's why she was attacked physically, emotionally, verbally, online, offline, in the street. She still carried on. She was stronger than people realised. This wee nurse from Greenock had the strength. So she took it to the UK COVID inquiry, and that's where we're going next. Right, well, we're moving very much right up to date now. Lesley was going to be standing at the UK COVID inquiry. She was going to be presenting absolutely explosive evidence. Everybody knew it. Everybody wanted to see it. Lesley was asked to give written statements so that they knew in advance what she was going to say at the inquiry. This is perfectly normal. There's nothing unusual in it. Several months ago, Lesley wrote her statements and submitted them, and they were accepted. And that's fine as far as it went. And she would have been giving evidence on the 22nd and 23rd of May this year, in a few days' time, at the time of recording this video. Last Sunday, the 16th, the Scottish Daily Express published an article featuring Lesley, where she's going in, explaining some of the evidence she's going to be giving, not in too much detail, just overview, and saying some of the problems that have occurred, etc., etc. This was written by the Daily Express, the Scottish Daily Express's editor, Ben Borland. Ben published this on the Sunday, and it sat on the Sunday Daily Express's website for 4 days. Nobody complained about it. Then, strangely, on Wednesday evening, boom, it's gone. It's disappeared. It is history. It is a dot. It is no longer available. I contacted Ben Borland. Ben said there was no injunction. I figured straight away that there must have been an injunction. That's why it was taken down. Ben said no injunction. It was just an evidential thing, and that they had to take it down. Had to take it down. But without an injunction. Now, my immediate reaction was that pressure had been put on the Daily Express, on the Scottish Daily Express, to take this down. That pressure can only come from on high. My initial reaction is Dorothy Bain, because the Scottish government don't want Lesley's evidence going out because they know how absolutely damaging, destructive that evidence would be should it be released. And so it had to be taken down. That had to be taken down, and they had to then work on a way of getting Lesley out of the UK inquiry. 3 months or so after she presented her written statement, and about a week before she was due to take the stand, the UK COVID inquiry wrote back to Lesley saying her statement was unacceptable and that they have made some appropriate changes to it, and sent her a copy. This was on the same evening that the Daily Express were forced to take down their piece from the previous Sunday. Coincidence? Possibly not. So that Wednesday night, Lesley was presented with this thing saying that she either had to accept the changes that they had done or represent her evidence in a new form, or that she would not be allowed to take the stand at the COVID inquiry. This is where this whole thing now gets incredibly sinister. You've obviously got dark forces. The dark forces that forced the Scottish Daily Telegraph to remove that article. The dark forces that, with just a few days before she's due to give evidence, and months after she first presented her statement to the COVID inquiry team, she got asked either to retract and not stand, or to rewrite it in an acceptable form, or to accept the form in which they have written it. The form that they wrote and sent back to her for approval was highly edited. It took out a lot of evidence that she said needed to be put before the people. It redacted names, it changed events, and it became effectively, as far as she was concerned, a work of fiction that did not reflect her reality and that she was unprepared to accept it, and therefore was very, very distraught. It gets slightly darker now. She was distraught, and so she went on to her Facebook. Now, her Facebook group is not public. It is, no, this is her personal Facebook. It's private. It's only her friends. It is a private Facebook group. And on there, she said in her private Facebook group that she was deeply unhappy at what had done, and she didn't think she could go forward, and certainly couldn't present the evidence as they've rewritten it, and that she didn't really think it would be worth her attending this inquiry if that's all that she was going to say. That's what she said in her private Facebook group, of which I'm privy, of course. At the same time, I contacted Ben Borland. I speak to Ben Borland, and I say to him what's going on, and he's explained this thing. This is how I knew about what Ben Borland said about it being taken down. That was all within a short period of time. Subsequently, she's had a real change of heart. She said, you know what? No, screw them. She said, this is Lesley. She said, screw them. I'm going to rewrite my evidence. And so she took her initial written evidence and redid it. It's a long piece. It is a massively long piece. And so she sat there on Thursday and wrote. She said it took her nearly 24 hours to rewrite all this out, rephrase it, re-put it in. And with literally minutes before the deadline, submitted it, and off it went. Roger Livermore, who also is involved in all this, and of course many regular viewers, older viewers will know, we've had Zoom calls together, and indeed Roger has been very kind and actually come into the studio, and we did a quick Q&A with Roger in the studio some time ago. Marvellous man. He is, I think he's retired now, but he was a chief prosecutor. And so again, this is an expert in the field. This is not someone, some bloke down the pub. This is Roger Livermore, chief prosecutor of England and Wales. He looked at Lesley's new evidence, the new written one that she spent 24 hours writing, said it would absolutely blow them out of the water. It is fantastic, and it is just sheer, unbelievable, but you could tell it was true. That had been submitted. A very, very short time later, it appears on the COVID inquiry website that Lesley Roberts has resigned and is no longer going to be giving evidence at the inquiry. She's given a formal notification of pulling out of the inquiry. Lesley had done no such thing. She had not pulled out. She had given no formal notification whatsoever. She was summarily dismissed, and they lied on their website. They are lying on the COVID inquiry website. Do you know, ladies and gentlemen, what the reason given for Lesley's apparent formal declaration that she's no longer going to appear? It's because they said Lesley had written on her social media that she did no longer wish to appear. On her private group. Private. They have gone into her private group, gained access, seen her distraught comment, she's no longer feeling like she wants to appear, and is going to use that to extricate her from the inquiry, because they know her evidence is so damaging it would not only destroy the Scottish government, but if put into the COVID inquiry in the UK, for which a lot of the similar rules were put, it would damage the credibility of the entire British government and the establishment. And the establishment are now working and going through her private socials to find any reason whatsoever to pull her from the inquiry. And they did that within half an hour, 40 minutes or so of her submitting her new evidence. They will not have had time to read that. They will not have had time to analyse it. What they wanted was her to just give up. They weren't expecting her to put in a whole many 45-page statement that took her 24 hours to write, and which has been described as by the chief prosecutor, by Crown prosecutor, as explosive. And so the state, it's got to be the state. Somebody in the civil service has had to do this. Somebody in that inquiry has had to go through and investigate a private individual's private socials, and then use that one line as a formal application to resign from the whole COVID inquiry. Definitely not. She's put in a referral to say, I want this reconsidered. Lord Brailsford, this guy, who is running the inquiry, threw her out, has not responded. They do not want her there. Why is Brailsford so scared of what Lesley has to say? It seems that the Scottish Government and the UK Government and the various inquiry teams, all of them have worked together to silence Lesley Roberts. But she will not be silenced. This video is giving you the background. This video is telling you where you are. This video is showing you how pressure is brought by judiciary on the papers, by an inquiry lying on its website, by dark, nebulous forces throughout the establishment doing their very best to hide her evidence, to try and destroy her as a person, to ensure she cannot present this in a legal COVID inquiry. Ladies and gentlemen, later on, hopefully today, I will be doing a Zoom with Lesley. She's going to go through and explain all this. And at some point, we are going to publish all her full evidential texts. You can make your own mind up. But I think you would have to be absolutely nuts to think that Lesley is just not the victim of an entire conspiracy to hide and cover up what she has to say. What are they so scared of? What are they terrified of? Roger Livermore will be writing to Lord Brailsford. I'm hoping to hear back from him very shortly, and I will hopefully do a very quick video on what Roger Livermore is saying to Lord Brailsford and asking Lord Brailsford why he thinks it is appropriate for a legal judicial inquiry to lie on its websites, because at the moment it does, it therefore loses all credibility. And indeed then, fruit of the poison tree, if they're lying about that, what else are they going to lie about? There is a conspiracy. I think it's clear now. These things do not happen at random. This is not coincidental. It cannot possibly be coincidental. There is too much pressure from the judiciary, pressure from the civil service, pressure from 2 inquiries, and all designed to protect the truth from ever coming out. It will. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. I hope this very long video has been informative, and I hope that you'll tune in later to see what Lesley has to say and to see what Roger Livermore has to say in his letter, and then in a few days when we'll do the full drop of what she has to say, probably, and I'm hoping on the 22nd, so the same day she was meant to give the evidence. We'll drop it, and I think Ben Borland from the Sunday Express may also be dropping it if he's allowed. Certainly I will, and if they try coming after me, I'll make sure that someone in a foreign country drops that evidence instead. It will come out one way or another, even if it's from a country that has no over which this country has no jurisdiction. It will come out. Thank you very much. Take care. And I'm sorry it's taken so long. Goodbye.